What is this magical thing?
Magic. I'm a magician.
It's just hard to see.
Are you up?
Yeah. Some of the numbers that I put forward, it did take some interpretation before I selected the values.
Hey, how are you?
You had to take like you're an output like every 6 hours, and sometimes there were no values input. So I would have skewed the data a little bit, I guess.
Probably would have been more accurate because, well, then you would have made like this.
So,
Just had your data set.
we do it on camera, like I can show you what's in the first page. Yeah, that's true. This is what, yeah, it's like expected. So it's kind of, sometimes I would like skip one and then the next one would be like double. So I did mine not in the one.
You don't have to. I mean, more or less, yeah,
Yeah, I
be
know.
able to see, you can kind of go back and forth, so.
And also right now, make sure.
Yeah,
You may, you can always go into lens if you need to.
for the most part.
Yeah.
Where's the values?
There's and that's kind of feature. History, trying to be.
Yeah.
And that's really a good piece of it from the future. You know, a lot of it is big data analysis. The whole point of the
Yeah. It's a really huge advantage. Yeah, I think like,
Yeah, and being able to use much like a base that's more robust.
glad it's coming.
Yeah. There's a lot, but. Yeah. I'll go in. Oh, yeah. Oh, no. Oh, really? Just to get friends. No question. You're married. Have a kid.
Which is good.
You can switch there. If she's not good. She's getting her off. No, she's
She wants to do it one day or no?
yeah, she's like, it was birthday.
Yeah.
I don't know.
All right, we will go ahead and get going. So good morning, everybody. Dr. Strada's way. So good to see everyone. I'm sure hopefully we'll have a few more folks join us as we get going. But for those of you that have not had the opportunity to meet Dr. Anthony Hood before, here he is. No. So I just actually found out yesterday that it's been a while, but was promoted to associate professor, has tenure, which is great. Huh? I know.
Youngest ever.
But, you know, who's right?
Yeah.
But Anthony's phenomenal. He's been a part of our training program for many years on this topic. And what he's done is really taken the whole concept of team science and that's been utilized in other areas, business and other professions, and try to say, how does that work in an academic setting? How does that work with research teams, mentoring teams? And I won't steal too much more from your presentation, but he's a great individual to kind of think about these concepts, and as I've mentioned before, he's always willing to be a fly on the wall if you're trying to figure out if you've got some issues within your team. But with that, I'll hand it over.
All right. Great. Good morning. So thank you guys for being here and giving me the opportunity to kind of talk to you really about my research interests as well as my practical interests, and they reside in teamwork. Before I came into academia, I was actually a network engineer for AT&T for 10 years. And so when I came into academia, what I really wanted to study was social entrepreneurship. This is this application of entrepreneurial principles to social issues. I remember the first week of my doctoral program, I'm searching for articles on social entrepreneurship, and I kept running across these articles on social networks. And so in my mind, I'm thinking social networks is like Facebook, Twitter, that kind of stuff. What I realized is this whole academic literature on social networks, the presence or absence of connections between individuals, organizations, and things like that. And so I started reading these articles on social networks, and it just felt like the words were just jumping off the page. And later what I realized is that it was really just a continuation of what I had been doing as a network engineer, designing networks and fiber optic circuits across the country for different customers. What I realized is that people have networks as well. And so I've just always been fascinated at why would there be a connection between two individuals, or why not would there be a connection, and what type of connection, and what are the consequences for the presence or absence of relationships between individuals for things like individual performance, team performance, and things like that. So that's how I arrived at where I am right now. One of the contributions that I made to the field in my dissertation was applying the concept of social networks to the study of conflict, particularly conflict within teams. One of the things that we'll talk about today is that conflict is inevitable. Now, as a start, we have a slide later on, but I'll just kind of jump into it. What do you guys see as conflict? What is conflict?
It could be a difference of opinion.
Sure, it could be a difference of opinion. Anytime you have a difference or a discrepancy between individuals, that is the setting for conflict. And what we'll talk about later on in the presentation, there are different types of conflict. So applying this social network analysis to the study of conflict was my unique contribution to the field. So some of the things that we're going to talk about today is the differences between teams and groups, because there's a difference. And we're also going to talk about these differences between creativity, innovation, entrepreneurship, and strategy. Oftentimes we throw these terms around and we kind of use them interchangeably, but actually there's some nuances between them. And those nuances are important because this has an implication on how you actually build and maintain your teams. And then we'll talk about these different types of conflict that occurs in teams. So let's start. What is a team?
Group of people with a similar goal.
Yes, group of people with a similar goal. That is exactly what somebody said yesterday. First comment. Good.
People that you really depend on to maybe get your job done or your work done.
Yes, so being able to depend on others, yes. What's the difference between a group and a team?
Cohesion.
Say again?
Cohesion.
Who said that? I can't. Okay. Speak on that. What do you mean by cohesion?
Groups of a more loosely defined term doesn't necessarily imply any kind of collaboration or inherent desire to cooperate, whereas a team implies some at least desire on the part of the participants to achieve a goal in concert.
Yes. So what's the glue that's going to hold us together? What's the motivation for us actually coming together? And in the absence of that, then that's going to be a hindrance to actually developing a team. Those of you who are coming in, we got seats up front if you want to come a little closer. So that's good. So let's go to the actual official definition of a team. So this was a report that was commissioned by the National Academies of Science a couple years ago called Enhancing the Effectiveness of Team Science. If you ever need some reading material, you need to sleep, it's a 256-page report, but it's chock full of really good information. They essentially did a systematic review of what do we know about teams in general, and particularly what do we know about teams in the sciences. And so I'm an organizational science. So in organizational science, we've been studying teams for about 50 years. And so lately, we've been really trying to take these concepts and say, is there something different about research teams, particularly in healthcare and the sciences? Is there something different than what we would expect amongst engineers or construction workers or what have you? So in this report, they define a team as 2 or more individuals. I'll stop there. Oftentimes, I think we have an idea that a team needs to be 3, 4, 5 people. It needs to be this huge conglomeration. But actually, all you need is 2 people, and you have the makings of a team. So you have 2 or more individuals with different roles and responsibilities. One of the key characteristics of high-functioning teams is this different roles and different responsibilities, where individuals specialize in different areas, because that allows us to be a lot more efficient and effective in how we carry out our work. You guys ever work with somebody where it seems like you guys are stepping on each other's toes because you have people doing exactly the same thing? Sometimes that leads to conflict because, I may be looking at Ryan like, well, Ryan and I are doing the same thing. Clearly he doesn't do as well as I do, so why is Ryan even on the team? So to head that off, we need to make sure that we have defined specialized roles and responsibilities, but at the same time, we have to be very complementary if we want to avoid the types of conflict that derail innovation in our teams. Social interaction is also a key defining characteristic. So like you mentioned, cohesion. It helps if people actually talk with each other, right? In a team. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but just answer quietly. How many of you work with people that you just prefer not to talk to? You just prefer not to interact with people. But this person may be a key member of your team and you just really can't avoid it. So sometimes there's some underlying tension that can block social interaction. Sometimes we work in teams with people where it extends outside the workplace, where after work we may go grab drinks, or we may have breakfast or coffee, or maybe we go to each other's houses, maybe we go to the ball game together. So sometimes that social interaction provides the social glue that keeps us together. Interdependence is probably one of the most key factors that separates a group from a team, and we kind of touched on that. Interdependence suggests that one person's output makes up somebody else's input. So it often means that I can't get my work done until somebody finishes their part and then hands it off to me. And so oftentimes what happens in teams is that you may have a poor handoff that leads to some type of mishap in the hospital or some kind of miscue or near miss. So interdependence is really important. In groups, you may have multiple individuals working quote unquote together, but everybody can really get their work done independently. And so if everybody can get their work independent of everybody else, then you really have a group instead of a team. We also, teams work in an organizational system. This is really important, this idea of an organizational system, because the policies and procedures and practices of the organization sometimes dictates who's going to be on a team and who's not. It also dictates what our motivations, our goals are for actually engaging in the team project. So like Ryan said, I just recently received promotion and tenure. My promotion and tenure was primarily based on the number of peer-reviewed journal articles that I had accepted. Okay, I can go up for full and never bring in $1 grant funding, and I would be just fine for promotion and tenure. But that's how the organizational system is set up in my school. In other schools that may not fly, you may need to bring in grant funding and show that you're an independent researcher. Other schools, they may have to publish a book, their monograph or what have you, if they want to get promotion or tenure. Why is this important? This is important because if we're going to be engaging in the types of interdisciplinary research that we know that we need to be doing and what's being pushed by the organizational system, we need to make sure that we understand what people's motivations are in engaging in an interdisciplinary project. So if you have somebody from the School of Medicine and the School of Business and the School of Engineering and the School of Arts and Sciences all working collaboratively on some type of project, it's very important to understand up front at the beginning of that project, what do you want to get out of this project? There have been times where I've collaborated with people on the health side of campus and they say, Anthony, I really love to work with you, but I don't have any money in my budget, to pay you. I'm like, well, my salary comes from the business school. I'm not necessarily engaging in it for funding or percent effort. I'm engaging in it because I need some peer-reviewed journal articles because I'm going up for promotion and tenure. So I have a different motivation for engaging in the project, and so understanding that motivation is key to understanding the team and the team's motivations. We have to perform tasks, and then we have to accomplish common goals. So again, we need to understand that different individuals will have different goals coming into the team, but also we have to understand that we have a shared goal. And that shared goal, we may have an overarching goal of the project, but then we may have individual goals, or we may have sub-goals. So particularly if it's a project, you're going to have timelines and phases, and it's very important that people understand what all those things are up front before engaging in the project. How many of you guys have heard of team charters? Team charters? So team charters have been described as a prenuptial agreement for teams. Okay, so it's really, you kind of lay out in the beginning, okay, this is what we're going to be doing on the project. This is why we're doing it. This is who's on the project, and who's going to do what. So we have to lay out the tasks. We have to lay out who's going to do what. We also have to lay out the goals, and then we also have to assume that there may be conflicts that occur. In some of your grant proposals, you're probably going to have to acknowledge conflicts of interest that may come up and how you're going to address those conflicts of interest. But also, you may have interpersonal conflicts that come up. A good team charter will lay out, a strategy for if and when conflicts occur, this is how we're going to resolve. So case in point, I teach our capstone strategic management course. I put my students in teams the first week of class, and they stay in those teams the entire semester. And so they work on these semester-long projects. And it never fails, at some point during the semester, some students are going to come to me and they're going to say, Dr. Hood, we really need to take John off the team. And we want to fire John from the team because John hasn't been doing what John is supposed to do. And I'll typically say, okay, so when you went to John and says, John, you were supposed to turn in your work Friday by 5 o'clock and you didn't turn it in, what did John say? Oh, well, we didn't talk to John. We just want to fire him from the team. Okay. Is that fair to John? Well, it's not fair to John because it's not fair to us because John didn't get us to work back. So what I've realized is that I have my students do a team charter the first week of class where they lay out what everybody's schedules are, who works what jobs, and their availability, who has classes at what time, who's going to do work on the project, who's going to be the researcher, who's going to do the PowerPoint presentation, just kind of really laying out those roles and responsibilities, and what are the consequences for non-compliance. And are people going to give a first warning, and then after the first warning, and the grievances have to be detailed, if they don't comply at that point, then we will agree that John will be removed from the team. That way, everybody's on the same page. Now, I know that probably doesn't happen a lot, in our research teams, but I wonder should it. Okay, so we're going to have an exercise in a little bit where we're going to talk about what happens if you're the slacker on the team on your research project. You didn't get your work done, you didn't analyze the data, you didn't collect the data like you were supposed to. What happens if your teammates want to kick you off the team? How does that happen? Or what if there's somebody else on the team that's not pulling their weight? How do you have that conversation? Okay, so having a team charter in place just makes it a little bit more comfortable and much more understanding if and when things like that will occur. So some of the current trends in scientific research. There was a time several decades ago where a significant portion of the peer-reviewed journal articles that came out, as well as the grants, were single-author publications. But now what we're saying is that there's been a significant uptick such that 90% of all science and engineering publications are by at least 2 or more authors. And again, we said a team consists of 2 or more individuals. So we are rapidly moving towards this era of team science. Actually, we're already there. And most publications are authored by 6 to 10 researchers across multiple institutions. So more than just working with people on your campus, you may be working with people all over the country, maybe all over the world. I just actually submitted an article about 2 weeks ago where a researcher reached out to me a couple months ago from Japan. He was like, Anthony, I read your work. We're working on similar things. I got an opportunity to write this lit review. I want you to work with me on this project. So he's halfway on the other side of the world. I got some other projects I'm working with people in Greece, Austin, Texas, California, Tuscaloosa, and UAB. So that type of interdisciplinary team-based science requires us to be able to interact socially across computer-mediated technologies. Okay, that creates more challenges for engaging in interdisciplinary team-based projects, and we need to make sure we're equipping ourselves as well as our teammates with the ability to engage in virtual teamwork. Then researchers are not always academics. So is anybody here either doing maybe community-based research or planning to do community-based research? Okay. So you may have an instance where you're engaging, you're collecting data, or you're partnering with somebody out in the community. Maybe it's a pastor of a church, and so you're doing research on hypertension amongst African Americans in the Black Belt. So you're going to have to find somebody in that community that can be an opinion broker and that can help you enroll subjects. So you may have to partner with somebody out in the community. So what does it look like in the era of team science where you actually invite that person to be part of the research team up front as opposed to just a research site? That creates challenges. Even creates challenges when you have people from different schools on your campus collaborating on a project. What I've noticed is that a lot of the theories and the concepts that we use in the organizational sciences, they're being used by other schools, but we use different terminology. We call these theories different names. These concepts, these constructs, different names, but it's describing the same phenomenon. And so that difference in language and terminology can create challenges and barriers to communication. Then also the size of our teams continue to increase. So we're going from 1 and 2 person teams up to 6 and 10 research teams. There's some research projects you'll see where there are 30 people on a project. How many of you guys are familiar with translational science? What is translational science?
It's somewhat of it's
No, not you. I want one of the budding emerging scholars to tell me what translational science is. Ma'am, you raise your hand. What is translational science?
Oh gosh.
That's what you get for sitting so close to me.
It's kind of science throughout all the different steps it takes from the basic all the way up into implementation. And
Yes. Yes. So it's this recognition that there are different phases to how we actually identify problems, opportunities in the field. That's what we call the T0 phase of translational science. And then we have T1, the T1 phase where we're actually doing basic or discovery type of research. Then we have T2 where maybe we've found something, maybe it's an animal model, something we found in the lab, and now we need to test out its efficacy in human populations. And then once we find something there, then we have to translate that into actual practice. So maybe we're going to do what we would call bench to bedside, where we're actually empowering the physician to actually maybe do a trial or something in the hospital. And then once we figure out that works, then we have to disseminate and implement those findings either through our publications, doing presentations. And then T4 is how do we actually scale up and spread the findings into population health and global health. And then once we scale it up, spread it, then we still need to go out into the community to figure out, okay, what works, what are the boundary conditions of the science, and how do we improve upon it. And so then you go back to T0 and T1. And so what this shows is that not only is it a continuum, but all these different phases are interlinked. And there are different researchers and scientists and academics as well as lay people that are working in these different phases. Now the challenge with translational team-based interdisciplinary science is that all these folks come with a different paradigm and a different worldview. The person who is out in the community that is doing population health, that works for the Department of Public Health, is going to have a different frame of reference than maybe the person that's working in a lab most of the time, or the person that's a physician that's mainly in the clinic, or the true academic, the pure academic that's mainly just in their office, writing papers and publications. What about the patient and the caregiver, and what's their role in this? And so everybody has a different frame of reference. How do we make sure that those people are on the same team at the same time at the beginning of the project, and then stay engaged in the project throughout? That's a really, really difficult challenge that we're going to have to address as we progress with our science. All right, so activity. And those who are at Tulane, I want you to participate in this activity as well. I want you guys to develop 3-person teams. And I want you to discuss what do you see in this diagram. Okay? And it may help to stand up. So I want everybody to stand up. I want you to break out in threes. And I want you to look at this diagram and tell me what you see. So you guys, I'm going to give you 5 minutes and then you report back out to me. Hey, those of you who are at Tulane, I hope you heard the instructions. So what I'd like for you to do is everybody in the room stand up. I want you to get into 3-person teams. I want you to look at this slide that I have on the screen, and I want you to tell me what you see. What are the insights that you can gain from this diagram? If you have questions, please type in the chat box, and Ryan is managing the chat box, and he'll let me know what your questions are.
Minor detail, somewhat. Yeah. There's a lot of people are unrandomly spaced. For example, the president and maybe some people on teams are kind of closer. Body language wise, like you see, like not fully face efficient, like definitely do a little side handle, like check in, but. Yeah. Still kind of like beat themselves. They're all like right on the 5-year-old side. They're all
Okay, thank you for your engagement on that. So our colleagues at Tulane, If you would, maybe get a spokesperson and tell us what were your insights on this particular diagram.
Hello.
Hello.
And so while there's a circle surrounding the patient and each professional is connected to one another, can they hear me now? Yeah.
Yes, we do.
Well, each professional is connected individually to one another. They aren't all connected together and communicating with one another in a team sense. This looks more like a group. So if there were lines connecting each of the professionals that are surrounding the patient, as well as continuing those connections to the patient, there would be a true team working and collaborating to benefit the patient.
So that's a good insight. So we have what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 individuals surrounding the patient, but not all 7 are connected to each other. Maybe one person is only connected to 2 other people, but not to everybody else.
Exactly.
Great, good insight. What else?
She seems to be the focus of their interests rather, just like each individual person, rather than, I don't know, maybe the directionality is such that she's not informing the collective work, she's just informing each of their individual tasks.
All right, could you repeat that, please?
Come on up.
I don't know if this is like really represented practically, but it seems like she's the focus of each individual person rather than the focus of the collective research goal. So, it's my understanding that with patient-centered outcomes research, the goal is to involve patients kind of from the beginning all the way through the end of the process. And so while she seems to be the object of their study, she doesn't seem to be as much like part of the subject with which the research is being kind of constructed or planned out.
Okay, that's a good insight. So the patient is the subject of the research. Everybody's focused on her, I guess, which is a good thing, but the focus there could miss other things. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, she's not super involved in the construction or the planning of the research. She's just a subject.
Okay. Cool. All right, so here in the room, what were you guys' insights? What did you discuss? Speak loud so they can hear you. Yes, sir.
What Wendy, Sam, and I were kind of just discussing this, and we came up with a lot of things we liked it. But we were also saying, it seems as if the patient is the center. They have kind of a common goal of taking care of the patient, but it does not appear that there's like a designated leader. Also, the proximity to the patient appears to be a little bit different. The gentleman in the white coat appears to be a little bit closer than the guy with his sleeves rolled up, or our eyes are just bad. I'm not sure. Also, there's it seems like some of the providers are using different kinds of technology. You have 2 of them who have kind of tablets and a smartphone, while it appears someone else kind of has like a legal pad or just a traditional medical chart.
Okay, so let's kind of unpack some of that. So one of the questions was, who's the leader of this team? So that's a question, and who should be the leader? Traditionally, I think we've taken the standpoint that the physician or the primary care is a leader. Maybe, if this is a patient that's dealing with a cancer diagnosis, maybe the oncologist is the leader of the team. But patient-centered research, does that mean that the patient should be the leader of the team? And does the patient have the literacy, the health literacy that is, or do they feel empowered and equipped to actually take charge and manage their own care? Or what about the patient's caregiver, if this particular patient is not in a place where they can actually take a leadership role? What are your thoughts on that?
I guess our bias from being for residents. So when you see patients in the hospital and there's multiple medical teams taking care of the patient, it can be very confusing for them.
Sure.
If you don't have crosstalk between the groups, and also there's not a designated leader or a team that's their primary team that ultimately gives them the plan for the day.
Right.
So I think that there should be a primary team that's assigned as a leader between the groups that is going to be the one that answers all the patient's questions and then disseminates out who needs to come see them again or needs to talk to them again about such and such. But if there's no designated leader and a bunch of teams are telling the patient a bunch of different things, it gets very confusing for the patient.
So what does that look like on a day-to-day basis
Like
in
that.
healthcare?
Like that.
Like this, but you did say there are multiple teams, so is there a primary
Yes.
person that's leading?
Yes.
Okay, is that the primary care physician or what?
Whoever they're admitted to the hospital is their primary team.
Okay, what about when they leave the hospital?
They'll be their primary care.
Gotcha.
It's almost a little, well, like the patient's input, I think is vital. It's almost a little unfair to ask them to lead that team because you have a group of people who dedicate their lives to studying what to do, how to do, and then to expect them to have the healthcare knowledge to fully understand a lot of the consents, different things that we ask them to understand is a little bit much. So.
Right. So one of the concepts that we talk about in the teams literature is shared leadership or team-based leadership, to where you may have a formalized leader of the entire team, but each person on the team is a leader in their own specialized area of expertise. And so what we need to recognize here is that the patient also is an expert. The patient is an expert on the patient. So when you think about, we may prescribe some type of treatment plan or care to the patient, but what about when they get home and they live 30 miles from the nearest healthcare facility? Or do they live in a food desert where they, can't get healthy food? Or maybe they live in a high crime neighborhood where they can't get the physical activity that they need. So that patient is an expert on their own care, and that needs to be recognized as well. So having a team of leaders is an effective approach to teamwork and team science. What else? Other groups? Oh, you want to pack something on? We said something about leadership. Tell me your name, sir.
Oh, Justin.
Justin. Okay. So what's the second thing you mentioned? So you mentioned leadership, and remind me what's the next thing.
We also kind of mentioned the technology as well as the proximity.
All right. So let's unpack the technology part. So what were your insights about the use of technology here versus? And I've been reminded by some of my friends that they use moleskins and they don't like to use electronic stuff. They reminded me that notebooks are technology too. It was the first technology, but it's technology nonetheless, okay? So those who are using electronic technologies versus paper and pen or something like that, is that good? Is that bad? How does that work right now in our teams? Say again?
I think it depends on the patient.
Okay.
So your younger patients are accustomed to, people having tablets and things like this, but an older patient, just completely, it's mind-blowing to them. I feel like they feel like you're not paying attention to them or you're not dedicating your attention if you have technology instead of old technology of paper and pen.
Yeah, so I've had the same primary care physician for about 20 years. And so our interactions I've seen have changed over the years, particularly now that he's gone to adopting an electronic medical record. So instead of a lot of just interaction, he's a Laker fan, I'm a Laker fan, so we're talking about the game, we're talking about playing basketball at the YMCA, and of course now his time is shorter, so he can't spend as much time with me as he did 10 years ago. But also he spends a lot of time typing on his computer. I can see his frustration. I mean, he's an older gentleman, so I can see his frustration. He has to type in, he has to ask me these questions, and it's just really changed the dynamic of my interactions when I go to get my annual evaluation. So the technology can be a benefit because if you have this electronic medical record, hopefully everybody can be on the same page. But how many of you guys actually deal with electronic medical records? Okay. So somebody was telling us yesterday that, sometimes you have to fish through all this data just to get to the data that you actually need. I mean, are you experiencing that? Like information overload? So having the information is good, but you can have information overload, particularly when you're, dealing with electronics and virtual technology. What else?
I think it's kind of a fallacy to call it, to say that the technology is the problem, which is what we've historically, throughout history, we always do that. We say, well, the technology is the problem, but it's the implementation of the technology.
Yeah.
And so it's like an infant technology that's brand new, and so it's as we begin to learn how to implement it, then it will get out of the way.
Right.
Which it always does. You don't hear people now saying, it's so inconvenient to write because I had to get this chisel, and I had to have this hammer, and I had to have this big heavy stone, every time I want to write something down.
Right.
You don't hear that.
Right.
We don't complain about that, nor do we complain about our fountain pens breaking all the time or anything, right?
Right.
So, and that, I think, is just the evolution of technology. technology. So I think it's really important to not, because we in healthcare a lot of times slow the advance of technology because we make that connection between, oh, it's the technology that's the problem, when in fact the implementation of the technology that's the problem. And so we resist the change and resist innovation because we see the EMR as this demon,
Right.
when in fact it's the way we've done the EMR. And a lot of that is because we saw the EMR as a self-fulfilling prophecy. So
Right.
I think like that's an important point about in terms of presenting technology as a barrier to
Right. Oftentimes people tend to be resistant to change. Yes.
Let me digress for a second.
Please.
So one of the other things we discuss is who are we?
Okay.
We introducing part of the team formation, and you said, hey, form teams of 3. And as your definition indicated, part of that is social interaction. So let's not forget that there is lack of social interaction in those areas that we're not seeing,
Yes.
similar to what they have not seen in terms of there are no leaders. So point number 1 is it's important to have the social interaction, however brief that's going to be.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes. That's good. Yeah, so how many of you actually introduce yourselves before you actually start engaging in describing this? Right. And hopefully that made it a little better. I mean, some of you may spend most of your time just kind of saying, I didn't know you did that work. Do you know such and such in your department? That kind of stuff provides the, what we would call the social glue that helps you actually get your work done. What are the insights? Have we exhausted all the insights?
The family is missing.
The family. So the caregiver or the brother or the parent, where are they? Now, maybe it's implied that they are in with the patient, or maybe they're one of the other people. I don't know. But we have to make sure that we're taking that person into account. Is there an administrator there? You have to make sure that you account for the administrators, right?
Insurance company.
And the insurance company and everybody else. Okay? So that's important. All right. Thanks for that exercise. This is just another diagram similar to the previous one, but this is kind of looking at community-based participatory research to make sure that it's the community partner at the center of the team and making sure that you're recognizing expertise that they have and bringing that to bear on your projects. Now, I have the community person here, but this could be, the patient advisory board. So some of you who are going to be doing research, on patients, is there a patient advisory board that you can convene and they can inform the science that you're working on, whether it's a research project or whether it's a grant, to make sure that their ideas and expertise are brought to bear and that they feel part of the team. All right, so we're going to get into this idea of what are the differences between creativity and innovation. I'm going to tell you why this is important in a minute. Creativity is defined in the literature as the exchange and combination of divergent bits of information or expertise. Sometimes creativity happens within one individual. Oftentimes it happens between multiple individuals. We oftentimes have this idea of, this mad scientist working alone in a lab that has this eureka moment, right? Well, what the literature suggests is that most of the time, creative and innovative insights don't actually occur with just one person. It actually occurs in a team-based environment, particularly when you have people that are in different disciplines that are bringing together different concepts and combining them in a very novel way that creates something that's potentially useful. Okay? Now, creativity is different from innovation. Creativity is more so ideation, it's brainstorming, it's coming up with something new. But how many of you have friends that are really, really creative? Raise your hand. Anybody got some really, really creative friends or siblings? How many of you have those same people that they have new ideas all the time, but they never do anything with them? Like every day they have something new. It's like they're just in this constant state of ideation and brainstorming. Okay? And so they are littered with all these unfinished projects because their creativity just kind of torments them. I'll just admit I'm kind of one of these people where I'm just a really, really creative person. And I remember working with my advisor in my doctoral program. It seemed like every time I came into his office, I had a new idea for a research project. He's like, well, Anthony, what about the stuff I gave you last week to do? I know, but this is really hot. This is a really hot idea. We need to do this. So finally he told me, he said, Anthony, your ideas are tormenting you. He was like, you need to get your idea of journal. So he's like, go to the store, get you just a blank journal, and just start writing down your ideas as they come to you. Write down the date and just get it all out. And then once you get it all out, close the book and go back and do what I told you to do the first time. That has really helped me tremendously to actually stay focused, to stay on target. So now I got about 2 journals full of just ideas from different days over the past 5 years. And whenever I get to a place where I feel like I don't have a good idea or I need that next thing, I just go to my idea journal and flip through and be like, this is really good. But, oftentimes I don't even remember writing it. But I know it's my handwriting. I know it's my journal, but I don't remember writing it. So that's just a tip to some of you guys who are really creative. Even if you're not creative, I think everybody should have an idea journal. Now I use a tool called Evernote. Anybody heard of Evernote or use Evernote? Well, Evernote is an electronic notebook, and so now I use Evernote to keep a lot of my notes in. Innovation is the implementation of a novel or potentially useful idea. Okay? So innovation is really kind of related to this idea of translation. So going back to that translational science paradigm that I showed you, translation is actually taking that idea from one stage and moving it along to other stages into implementation. This would also be, determining the viability and the feasibility of that idea. I think I have some really good ideas, but I know most of them are not really good ideas. Okay? So if I come up with 100 ideas, maybe 2 of them are really, really good. But you need to have a process through which you're vetting those ideas and prioritizing them and picking the best idea. Now, when we're developing our teams, what I've realized is because I'm more on the creative side, I need to partner with people who are more so on the innovation side, the people who can get stuff done. How many of you have people in your network, they may not necessarily be creative, but if you give them a task, they will get it done. They may not think outside the box, but they will get it done. Okay, so I recognize that when I'm building out teams, I need to make sure that the creativity function is there as well as the innovation function is there. Okay, now creativity and innovation are different from entrepreneurship and strategy. So let's take this back to our science teams. So in our science teams, you need to make sure that you have people around you that are generating new ideas, they're searching for RFPs and grant proposals, and they're coming up with really cool ideas to respond to those grant proposals. But you also need to make sure that you're putting people on the team that can get stuff done. Your project managers, the people that are going to make sure that we're going to meet when we say we're going to meet, we're going to follow through, we're going to have defined goals, and just really kind of push and make sure that we're implementing things. You also need somebody that's entrepreneurial on your team to kind of think about, how do we pay for this stuff? How do we come up with what we call a viable business model beyond when the grant runs out? If it's a 3-year grant and you're working on this really, really cool project, when the grant money runs out, that project may still need to be ongoing. So you can write the next grant to get more funding to keep the project going, or maybe there are opportunities for you to engage in commercialization. So maybe that's something that you're developing that could be sold. I always use the idea of the patient navigation system that we've developed here at UAB. That's had really demonstrable results here at UAB. What about other academic medical centers? Would they be willing to, license out this process or procedure that we've developed here at UAB? Would they pay for us to send consultants to their academic medical center to help them get their navigation program off the ground? So instead of writing the next grant, or in addition to writing the next grant, we can bring in other funds through commercialization. Some of you may be working on some technology or some process or procedure or some kind of intervention that has some commercial appeal. And if so, you may have to engage with our Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship that handles the tech transfer, the licensing, and things like that. I also spent a good deal of time at Innovation Depot. How many of you are familiar with Innovation Depot? I know Haley is. I'm putting you on the spot, Haley. Tell us about Innovation Depot.
So the depot itself is an incubator space and for companies. I think there's like 102 or something companies there now. And there's a number of folks spun off the UAB and partner with the business school. It's in partnership with the Cloud School of Business. And so as people come up with ideas and are ready for a space, they can rent out a space at pretty low cost there to incubate and then spin off into a larger company there. And there's also the iLab, which is even closely more partnered with the Cloud School of Business that has student entrepreneurs coming through and some other tech training programs and stuff. Yeah.
So a lot of you are probably true scientists, true researchers, or true clinicians. You may not be thinking entrepreneurial. You may not recognize that stuff that you're working on right now, somebody may be willing to pay for it. So how can you make sure that you're partnering up with people who have the knowledge, the experience, and the bent towards recognizing the opportunities that really underlie your science, so that maybe you can diversify your research streams? I mean, you know, the amount of funding out there is shrinking and the number of people going after that funding is growing. So we're in a place where supply and demand is changing, and so that creates a lot more competition for maybe a condensing pot of funds to, you know, advance our science. So we have to think very entrepreneurial about how we actually get our work done, particularly 5, 10, 20 years from now. Mostly everybody in this room, you're at the beginning stages of your careers. And academic medicine is changing a lot, and it's not going to look like this 10, 15 years from now. And so we need to make sure that we're developing the teams that can last the long haul. Well, I always go to like the research expos and things like that where people are presenting their posters. And I remember a couple of years ago I was at a poster and a young lady had come up with some kind of methodology. She studied like bovine milk or something like that. And her research showed that she could, you know, pretty much tell with certainty whether a particular sample of bovine milk would be of higher or lower quality. And I was like, that is amazing. I was like, who are you working with on that? She told me, you know, whose lab she was working in. I was like, no, who are you working out in the industry, you know, with this? She was like, I'm not. I have a company that sends me milk and I just test it. I was like, you do realize that there are companies that will pay to have this technology to understand which cows are going to produce high or low quality milk. It never occurred to her. But that's not what she does, right? She's a scientist. She's not an entrepreneur. So what happens if we have these entrepreneurs that are partnered up with our scientists to recognize the opportunities that underlie this? So maybe you have some industry-sponsored research opportunities underlying your science. Entrepreneurship is different from strategy. So strategy is, okay, we've come up with something creative, we've taken steps to implement it, maybe we have a viable financial and business model to make sure that our science is sustainable, but how do we compete? And so strategy is all about competition. It's what we call advantage-seeking behavior. You know, if you're going to get that grant from the NIH or from the NSF, if you're going to get that paper published in Science Magazine or New England Journal of Medicine, you are competing with a very, very crowded field of other very smart, highly resourced individuals. So how can you develop a lab that is constantly tops in their field in grant writing and publishing? So you need somebody that's really looking at the strategy. How are we developing our team? How are we developing our lab? Do we have the best resources? Are we monitoring the environment to see who's trying to knock us off? So that's what we look at in strategy, particularly in business. We're always trying to see Facebook, Twitter, eBay, they're always competing against each other, right? And so we're always teaching our students, how do you identify competitive advantage and how you develop a sustainable competitive advantage? And so I want you to think about that in your science and your research teams. As you join labs or as you develop your own labs, how can you develop a competitive advantage? What makes your lab distinct? What makes your science distinct? This is what's going to keep us going forward in the future. All right, so just to recap, what are the 4 areas that we just talked about? Ma'am, tell me your name.
Caleb.
Caleb. All right, so what are the 4 areas that need to be present on your team?
Creativity, innovation, entrepreneurship, and strategy.
Right. So if you have a small team, sometimes, particularly in an entrepreneurial environment, sometimes you got to do all these things. It's difficult to do all 4 of them, but as you get more resources, as you hire more postdocs or bring in other people, you want to make sure that you're identifying these roles and assigning these roles to different people on your research team. All right, so let's get into conflict. We already talked about what is conflict. You know, you guys told me that it's disagreements or discrepancies that happen within between individuals. But there are at least 3 types of conflict. And this is kind of what I did my research on. And I didn't come up with this rubric of these 3 types of conflict. This was Karen Jen's work from 1995. So we've been studying conflict since she came up with this back then. But there are 3 types of conflict. And if you're taking notes, and I hope you are taking notes, I want you to write this down. If you don't know the type of conflict you're having, it's very difficult to resolve. Dare I say impossible. If you don't know the type of conflict you're having, it's very difficult, dare I say impossible, to actually resolve it effectively. So, First type of conflict is what we call task conflict. So task conflict is we're having a disagreement over what needs to be done. It's an idea, it's a viewpoint, it's an opinion. Task conflicts are not necessarily personal. We're working on a project, and I say, you know what, I think this needs to go to the New England Journal of Medicine. Somebody else says, no, I think this is really a Nature type of article. So now we're having a difference of opinion over what's the outlet that we should send this project to, or what grant agency we should submit this to. That's a task conflict, okay? Or maybe a task conflict over just a viewpoint within the team. Now, a relationship conflict is just personal conflict. Where I come from, we call this beef, okay? So sometimes you may be beefing with other people. Maybe it's somebody that's in your group that is inappropriate. They come to work and they're talking politics. You're like, politics is not the place. You know, the workplace is not a place to be talking politics. Or maybe it's somebody that's always cutting you off, you know, when you're in working on your team projects. Maybe somebody's an extrovert, somebody else is an introvert. Some people are more bubbly when they come to work, and other people are like, don't talk to me until about 10 o'clock after I've had 2 cups of coffee. Okay? So these are conflicts just based on personal preferences, personalities, and things like that. And oftentimes it leads to annoyance, frustration. Sometimes it leads to actual abusive behaviors within the workplace. Sometimes people sabotage other people in labs and in team environments. Dr. Schreier, you've never seen this, right? It didn't happen. No, I mean just in the workplace. Process conflicts are different from task conflicts and relationship conflicts. So task conflicts are disagreements over what needs to be done. Process conflicts are disagreements over how to actually get the work done. So a process conflict could be over task delegation. John, I thought you were going to do this. No, I thought you were going to do this. No, I always do this. Well, you should always do this. Well, I'm overworked. That's a process conflict. Or it could be a process conflict over resource allocation, where one person feels like they're getting a greater share of the resources than somebody else. They're hogging all the resources. Maybe it's over workload sharing. So again, somebody's not pulling their part of the work, and so now we have a disagreement over who's supposed to do what. So what happens is in our teams, we will have disagreements, and we may mistake a task conflict for a process conflict. Or we may mistake a relationship conflict for a task conflict. So tell me your name, sir. Naveed. Naveed? Okay. So let's say, for instance, Naveed and I are having a disagreement over which RFP we're going to respond to. NIH versus NSF. We're just having a task conflict. I may misperceive his task conflict as gamesmanship or him trying to undermine me in a team environment. So I said, should go to NIH, he says NSF, and now I'm starting the process. You know what? It seems like every time I bring up an idea, he always shoots my idea down. I don't think he likes me. So what happens is now that task conflict has transformed into a relationship conflict. Or vice versa. Let's say, for instance, I just don't like you. Okay? Blame you. It's something about the way you chew, or you're just happy all the time. I don't understand why is he so happy? It's nothing to be happy about. Has nothing to do with our work. And so now you and I have a relationship conflict. He brings up an idea when we're working on a team project, and I shoot the idea down. Not because it's a bad idea, it's because I don't like you and I'm trying to make you look incompetent in front of everybody else. Okay? So that's another way where a relationship conflict can transform to a task conflict. Or maybe we have a process conflict where I thought you were going to do this part of the project. No, I thought you were going to do that. And now I get ticked off at you because of the process conflict we had. So the process conflict is now transformed into a relationship conflict. Now, if you don't know these different differences between a task, a relationship, and a process conflict, I may perceive it as a relationship conflict. You may perceive it as a task conflict. If I perceive it as a relationship conflict, I'm going to take steps to maybe resolve a relationship conflict. But the conflict management resolution tactics to resolve a relationship conflict may be different from those to resolve a task conflict. And so now we're missing each other because I'm trying to resolve a relationship conflict, you're trying to resolve a task conflict, and now we're speaking past each other. And what happens is we may exacerbate the actual conflict that we're having. So maybe we started with a level 1 conflict that's now escalated to a level 5 conflict. So now we're about to come to blows in front of everybody. So another exercise, I want you guys to take 5 or 10 minutes, break out into 3 different groups, not people that you talked to before, And I want you to talk about how have you seen this happen before, task, relationships, and process conflicts, or how do you think this may occur when you're working on your science project? So everybody stand up again. And I want you to talk about these task, relationship, and process conflicts. Have you seen them before? And how do you think this may show up in your science teams? Tulane, I hope you heard me on that. Let me know that you did, or if I need to clarify those instructions.
But they're trying to
Tulane, if you will, start wrapping it up.
No.
All right, y'all, let's go ahead and wrap up. All right, Tulane, you're on deck. Tell us what you came up with.
They're typing in the chat, so I'll read it for everybody. All right. It'll scroll up for me. Okay. We've brainstormed several examples of issues that we've had with PIs, ranging from not responding to emails, relationship conflict, passive-aggressive or aggressive emails, a relationship conflict, and allocating too much work, process conflict.
It's good. Did you come up with any task conflicts?
Task conflicts? Nothing particular to research, but non-research, they've had task conflicts.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, here in the room, tell me, what are your insights? What you come up with?
I feel like having names for the different types of conflicts and defining each one was very helpful, and then seeing how like a process conflict of like doing all the work leads to like different types of conflicts and vice versa, and how one issue can move in range.
Yes, thank you. Who else?
My team left.
So what was that conflict?
They should know a little bit but we kind of talked about authorship in research as being kind of a different process conflict than what, you're doing more than me, or, I should have done this. Or of like, well, I put the work into this, maybe I should get, authorship, that kind of process conflict, which changes to relationship conflict.
Yes. And that happens surprisingly with a lot of frequency, where you're working in a project and you actually never had the conversation up front about what the order of authorship was going to be, or even if you're going to be an author. I found out in my doctoral program that I helped somebody collect some data, and I coded the data, I cleaned it, I even helped with some of the descriptive statistics. And then later on, I saw the article in print based on the data that I've done. And like, hey, what's the deal? Like, well, you collecting the data and doing that kind of stuff did not denote authorship. So that was a lesson for me is I need to be very clear on what authorship means. Another thing that may come up is who actually owns the data. So I helped another professor actually collect some data, and then I thought that we co-owned the data, but I found out I did not co-own the data. It was his data, and then I had to ask for permission to actually use that data. These were things that nobody told me that I need to make sure I was clear about up front. That goes back to that importance of having a team charter to make sure that we discuss these things up front before we engage in the project so that hopefully we can head off some of the conflicts that inevitably will occur. Other insights?
We talked about like knowing the people you're working with kind of on a personal level before you make a team if you have the opportunity, just because some people are more likely to turn other conflicts into a relationship conflict than other people. Some people are able to say, oh, this is a task conflict, let's just resolve this task, where other people are not able to do that as well.
Yeah.
And if you know who you're working with, it'd be easier to navigate that than if you don't. But.
Yeah. So the great thing about what we do in academics and academic medicine is that we typically can pick our teams, right? We have a lot of leeway on that. When I worked in corporate, when I worked at AT&T, I was put into a team, and I didn't have any say over who I worked with. So that can be challenging. But so in academic medicine and research, the great thing is we can pick our teammates, okay? And we typically try to work with people that we like, or people that we would love to have a beer with, or go to each other's houses. The problem is we tend to work with people that we like. And we'll talk about that later is, you know, the dark side of friendship. What do you think the dark side of friendship could be?
Great
Too
album
much
title.
agreement.
Yes, a great concept. The dark side of friendship.
Too much agreement, not enough conflict.
Not enough conflict. Speak on that, please.
I think conflict is sometimes where good ideas or growth come from, and if you have someone telling you yes all the time, those are great ideas, and never challenging your ideas, you may not come up with as great.
Absolutely. Write this down. First idea that's brought up is typically not the best idea. First idea that's offered is typically not the best idea. Oftentimes we need to engage in debate, we need to vet, we need to challenge the ideas that are brought up in our team environment so we can come to our highest and best solutions to complex problems. The stuff that we all are working on right now in our science are all the hard problems. You know, people have said all the easy problems have already been answered. They've already been fixed. What's left right now is the wicked, challenging, persistently difficult problems. And that requires us to constantly vet each other, debate, challenge in order to get to our highest and best solutions. So that means that we do need to engage in task conflict. And so what the literature suggests is that teams that have low levels of task conflict will underperform teams that at least have a moderate level of task conflict. What the literature also suggests is that you have high levels of task conflict, that's bad for team performance. So in your teams, you need to create an environment where task conflict is appreciated, it's encouraged, but it can be kept to a moderate level so that it doesn't overwhelm the team. The reason why task conflict can overwhelm teams is because it can exhaust resources. If you spend all your time debating back and forth, you never actually get into implementation mode and actually get the work done. Relationship conflict is typically always bad. You don't want that to happen. If it does happen, it needs to be resolved and resolved quickly. If not, those underlying tensions will totally derail the team. And process conflicts, for the most part, are bad. We need to be very clear on who's going to do what resources are going to be allocated to which individuals. If not, that's going to totally derail, your team projects. Give you this short little diagram. This is one team at 3 different points in time. Beginning of their project, the middle of the project, and the end of the project. Oftentimes what happens is that conflicts may occur between only a small subset of people within your team. Maybe just 2 individuals that find themselves at odds. Okay? Well, what happens if in the beginning you only have 2 people involved in conflict, maybe you have a 6-person team, and then the middle of the project when it's, you're really in crunch time, that conflict is now spread to involve other people within the team. This probably happens more times than not. I want you to reflect on some of the teams that you've been in the past. Sometimes, particularly when you have friends within the team, Or you have subgroups of friends where you and I may be friends, but then you and Ryan may be friends, but maybe we're all not friends. And maybe Ryan and I are the ones that are having the conflict. You know, you may feel compelled to join my side, not because I'm right, because I'm your friend. And so now we have these subgroup factions that will develop within our team and maybe splinter the team. And so what happens right here is that you had an initial conflict that occurred between persons B and E, but then they spread, and so now maybe friends have joined in on the conflict. And then maybe person A is the informal leader of the team. And so person A is like, guys, this is dumb. We got work to do. Y'all make me sick. I don't know why every time we have a project, you guys are always fighting. And so now person A is also drawn into the team. So that's what we call conflict can be contagious, particularly if you don't recognize the type of conflict you're having and you didn't resolve it at time A. What's going on with person F right here at the midpoint of conflict? Say again?
I was just saying, they just go under the radar, like, I'm just not gonna say anything, you guys just fight it out and probably doesn't contribute much.
Yeah, so maybe maybe person F is just disengaged from the group, or maybe person F says, you know what, I just want to rise above it. You know, this is dumb, I got other stuff to do. Or maybe they're just ready for happy hour. It's like, the more you guys keep going, you're just keeping me from doing what I need to do. I'm trying to get out of here. All right? But what happens is, if that conflict is not resolved, what happens at the end of the project, maybe we're all involved in conflict. And sometimes this conflict has grown like a virus to infect the entire team. So this is why it's really important for us to actually address conflicts when they happen and identify them. And so the point that you brought up, and then you asked a question when we were in the breakout, having the actual language of there's a difference between a task, relationship, and process conflict is probably the first step towards having more effective teams. Because if you don't have that terminology, then you can't really identify or diagnose that conflict and then address it appropriately. So some of the things that we need to do is actually have the conversation. So, Naveed, it's clear that we're having a disagreement. I see it as a relationship conflict. How do you see it? And Naveed may say, well, you know, actually I just saw it as a task conflict. It's not personal with me. I just think that we need to send it to the NIH. Simple as that. Well, you know, the last 5 ideas I brought up, you kind of shot it down, so that's why I'm thinking that, you know, maybe there's something personal going on between us. And so now, armed with this language, and we are in agreement on what's a task or relationship conflict, now we can actually start resolving it. But without that language, then maybe we're going to be speaking past each other. So, to your point, this is maybe how we start disentangling some of the conflicts that may happen and start resolving these things. Now, another exercise, and this is going to be our last exercise of the day before we break. These are 3 different teams. This is actual research project that came out of my dissertation, where we were interested in understanding to what extent did friendship and conflict overlap within teams. So I started my presentation off telling you about social networks. So the social networks analysis, what we will do is we will have teams, and we will give each person on the team a survey. And in that survey, we may ask each individual to report their relationship with every other individual on that team. And we'll say, tell me, to what extent, person number 1, did you have a conflict with person number 2? Person number 2, tell me to what extent you had a conflict with person number 1. So we ask them about conflict, friendship, who'd you go to for advice, all these different types of relationships. Okay? So in this diagram, a red line means a person reported a conflict with somebody else. The black line, a person reported a friendship with somebody else. The direction of the lines are important. The direction of the line suggests that this person reported a relationship about somebody else. So, stand up. Tulane, this is our last exercise. I want you to stand up, get in 3-person teams, and I want you to come up with your best guess as to which of these 3 teams had the highest levels of performance. Team A, Team B, or Team C. And in addition to that, I want you to just tell me the other nuances of what do these lines mean? You have some lines that are double arrow lines, which means 2 people agree on the relationship. Sometimes you have a line where it's only one direction. So what are the consequences for a one-direction line versus a 2-direction line, and which of these 3 teams do you think had the highest levels of performance? Performance in our world could be your grant got highly scored and got funded, or you got that article published in the New England Journal of Medicine. So discuss. Thank you. And if you need to come closer to the screen to see, feel free to come up if you need to see it. And let me clarify. Let me clarify since nobody asked. The type of conflict here is a task conflict. I'm surprised nobody asked me that. But this conflict is a task conflict. That matters.
You know what I mean with all the versus the other two. Yeah. Here, and then, you know, and then maybe
I feel like I see what reminds me is like one dude's just like talking about that, like there's no conflict.
Yeah.
And relationships, that kind of connection. So I started thinking in terms of efficiency. Two concerned things, like the third person is the one that I'm kind of most concerned about. He's always in the wrestling. So in, for example, Team D, conflict with their so some people reinforce versus I kind of wanted to just Number two, just Johnson. So that's it's not like one is the word on the side. Right.
okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'll give you 60 more seconds. So 1 minute, start wrapping it up. Tulane, you got 60 seconds.
If
like one and four have a really good relationship that's bi-directional, and two has a conflict with one, then four is probably going to take one side. Versus like between 3 and 4, 1 and 2 would probably take four sides versus 3 sides. You know, maybe roughly speaking if they're like friends.
But if your friends share a color, it should be.
That's true.
Yes.
Then you're saying that all 3 of them would
That was initially where it's, I mean, but sometimes you need, like saying, so you have conflict and your friends are not, then they're just kind of, hey, this is your thing.
Oh, right. So you're saying like those 3 would just.
Yeah. I think we should.
All right.
Let's go to the.
We'll start here at UAB. So, what do you see? Or Tulane, you can start.
I'll read their answer. We thought that Team C could be most productive as person 3 is a non-friend. They could be a mediator and more objective and impartial. We thought it would be better than Team B because it would seem that friends would be teaming up against the non-friend, which would be a harmful work environment. However, having a task conflict among friends, sorting out such a conflict among people one is familiar with could be most productive, in our opinion.
Okay. Oh, thanks.
Can I do a timeout?
Please.
So we know where they stand. We want to ask the group, just raise a hand. Team A, Team B, Team C.
Oh, yeah, perfect. So in the group, what?
Yeah, they said C.
So they said C. How many of you say A? Raise your hand. So A had the highest levels of performance. Who said B had the highest level? Okay, who said C had the highest level? You guys are split right down them. I said the middle, there's 3 choices. Oh, okay, interesting. Okay, so those of you who said Team C, why C? Was it for the same reasons that Tulane said or different?
Well, that's a cop-out. You can't just say the same thing.
You're right.
I didn't consider the person 3 as being a mediator. I just thought it'd be easier to deal with conflict if you had a friendship relationship too.
Okay, so he said conflicts are easier to manage if they happen between friends. Okay. And the other group that said C, did you say C?
And the question of that, so
Sure, okay.
Are we addressing, is the conflict easier to resolve, or are we addressing which team is more efficient? Or
Which team had the highest levels of performance and why?
So we just,
It could be because of higher or lower efficiency.
so we also said C, we felt the same, that they felt, we didn't see a mediator potential for 3, we just said that performance would be largely dependent on ability to resolve conflict, at least in some sense, ability to resolve conflict, and the ability to resolve conflict would be highest in Team C.
Okay, great. All right, so those of you who said Team A, why A?
Sorry, I thought we were the only ones.
So we went on the premise that all the team members should be engaged, whether it's conflict or friendship.
Okay.
And then so we ruled out C, and then B, it looked like that person was only engaged in conflict and there was no conflict anywhere else. And so that's why we ended up with A, where there is, all the team members are engaged. There's like conflict is not just with that one person that doesn't have friendships. And so that's where we went with A.
Okay, thanks. You got it.
I think we thought very similarly to what she was saying, is that we wanted all team members to kind of be engaged, so we kind of started eliminating first. So Team C, for example, we thought the third person might be that kind of disengaged person. It is task conflict, which is kind of healthy in certain instances, so he's not kind of talking at all with the other team members. Team B, if 1, 2, and 3 are all friends and there's only conflict between friends and non-friends, they might kind of team up on team number 3, which is not as efficient. We feel in team number A, there's at least conflict between friends as well as non-friends. And then lastly, kind of just defining their relationships. Like, it seemed to us that person A1 and person 4 were best buddies because it's bi-directional. Person number 2 seems like he wants to be friends with 1-4. He's like third wheeling, but he's like not really there. Then team 3 or person 3, of course, is just kind of on the outside.
Yeah.
So we think that given that there's conflict between 1 and 2 as well as between 3 and 4, then there's enough of like a checks and balances system for everyone to kind of check each other in their conflicts.
Thanks. Those of you who said B, why B?
I would say we were really between team A and B, and we eliminated team C for a lot of the same reasons everyone else did. It had a person that was kind of not identified as a relationship either way. And we talked back and forth about A and B and the pros and cons to both. We ultimately decided B because we felt like the person number 3 could almost be the devil's advocate that challenges that group of friends to come up with better options and better things. And we also talked about conflict between friends and non-friends, that if it's a task thing, which is purely not personal, it may be an easier conversation to have someone you don't know as well. It's just like, hey, this is how we should do this, maybe we should do it this way. Whereas if you have a friend, it can make another level of like, you're trying to be loyal to your friend, how you can look bad, things like that. And so it may be easier to talk about tasks with people who are not friends.
Who else said B? There was another hand that said B.
I think it was
We said B. That person number 3 may just be a difficult person on the team, that the other 3 people can actually get their work done, and maybe exclude that person because they've never been productive. They produce conflict, so we just work among the 3 of us.
Mm-hmm. I love the way that you guys analyze this. So give yourselves a hand just for the analysis and the rationale. Actually, what we found consistently in our data was that teams that had the structure of B were the highest performing teams. So our theory was very similar to what you described, is that if task conflicts are going to occur, what we argue is that task conflicts that occur between people who are not friends is a much less resource-intensive type of interaction than if conflicts occur between people who are friends. You think about when you have conflicts with your friends, sometimes before I engage, if Naveed and I are friends and we're working in a team environment and Naveed comes up with an idea that I don't agree with, I may sit up there and use a lot of my cognitive process and think, you know what, I want to shoot down his idea, but I don't want to harm the friendship because he may feel some kind of way if I challenge him within a team. Maybe I'll wait until after, we leave the office and then tell him, like, dude, that's a dumb idea, but I'm not going to do it within the team. And if I withhold the conflict, does that reduce the performance potential of the team because we didn't actually vet it in a public environment? Also here in Team B, maybe the conflicts are much more contained in this person 3, and particularly because that person 3 is a non-friend. Okay, so when conflicts happen, as in C, that's a much more resource-intensive conflict. It takes more time, more attention, and more energy to actually engage in the conflict and to try to resolve it. Okay, so what we found consistently, we had like 120 teams, and so teams with the B pattern were the highest performing teams. So what? What do we do with this information? Well, this, kind of shows us that it's really important for us to really understand who's friends within our teams, who's having conflict, and what are the dark sides of friendship. Oftentimes we want everybody within our teams to, sing kumbaya, hold hands, and everybody is really cool with each other. But what happens if you have people who are too friendly within the team? Does that friendliness become a detriment instead of a positive? So again, I mentioned that I have these semester-long projects that I put my students and teams in. I found out very early in my academic career that I don't let students develop their own teams. Because when our students develop their own teams, they pick all their friends, and then at some point in the semester, they end up falling apart. Or they spend most of their time fraternizing and socializing and actually don't get their work done. Okay? So, and then oftentimes friends tend to have the same type of interest and expertise, so that limits their ability to be creative because they all think alike. But when you have a diverse team where people may not be friends, they have different expertise, then maybe they come up with their highest and best ideas and solutions to their problems. So these are some of the theoretical ideas that we have around friendship and conflict within our teams. That has implications on how we develop our teams in the sciences. So this is the last part and we'll wrap up. How do we create environments where we can minimize the occurrence of conflicts that may occur? Remember I said conflicts are probably inevitable. we can't really avoid them. But how can we kind of minimize them, or when they occur, resolve them quickly and recover from them? So one of the ways that we do that is to try to develop a psychologically safe team environment where people feel comfortable speaking up. So psychological safety is a construct in the literature that suggests that people feel comfortable taking interpersonal risks. So interpersonal risks could be engaging in behaviors such as admitting mistakes when they've occurred. You know, so if Ryan and I are working on a team and I'm responsible for analyzing the data, what happens if I mess up on the data analysis, but we've already sent that paper out for review?
You're fired.
You know, so do I speak up about it? You know, is there a threat of being fired or dismissed from the team? You know, if I'm a junior faculty, I don't want to have that hanging over my head. So maybe I just don't say anything about it if I believe that there are going to be very dire consequences for my teammates for doing that. The alternative is I don't say anything about it. It gets published. Some other researcher comes behind me, and now that paper has to be retracted. You don't want that to happen, okay? But all that, you know, is dependent upon, do we create a psychologically safe environment for our team members to say, hey guys, I messed up, I made a mistake. Or what about asking for help? You know, what happens if somebody asks for help within a team because they feel overwhelmed, they feel overloaded, or maybe they're just not really sharp in that particular area that you've assigned them to? Can they speak up without feeling like somebody's going to make them look incompetent, you know, or looking like a slacker? What about speaking up when we see something unethical happening, or something that's low quality, or something that could maybe endanger a patient? You think about an operating room where, you know, a physician may be engaging in a practice that's not a best practice. Does that nurse feel comfortable saying, hey, doctor, I don't think we should be doing that. You know, we need to change course. So do we have a psychologically safe environment for that person to speak up about that? And then having conflict, having the type of task conflict that's going to lead us to our highest and best solutions, do we feel comfortable doing that? If not, people may be concerned that, you know, they're going to be devalued, their words will be distorted, or maybe their expertise will be discounted, and then they're going to feel rejected. So if we don't create a psychologically safe team environment, you're going to have an environment where conflict is going to grow, it's going to spread, it's going to derail our team projects. So that's about the last thing that I'm going to speak on. And so as we part, I just want you to kind of tell me, based on the information I've given you, what are you going to do with this? Is there something that you can do differently going forward as you think about the teams that you're going to develop in the future, the teams that you're on right now, or maybe some of you are trying to get on a team. Maybe there's a particular researcher here at UAB or somewhere else where you want to work with them, you want to join their team. You know, is this information going to help you in that regard? So I'm going to open the floor up for you guys to kind of tell me about it.
I think it's very useful. Like, I like the team charter idea, really, kind of the prenuptial agreement.
Yeah. So in that team charter, you can actually lay out these definitions of task, relationship, and process conflict so that everybody's armed with that same language so that if and when they come up, we can address them appropriately. What else? That's good.
I think it's probably more useful for PIs than it is for trainees a lot of times, because what you're talking about, most of this stuff is about building culture, and cultivating culture is the role of the person who has de facto authority.
Yeah.
And that's the PI. Which it would be nice if, 5 years from, or 6 years from now, or whenever I'm sitting in, or 10 years from now, whenever I'm actually building a team, if I can remember to cultivate culture this way and stuff, and if this hasn't been beaten out of me by that point.
Yeah.
But I think to me, that's the concern that I have, is that, like, right now I may care about this, and as a trainee, it may all be important to me and all that kind of stuff. But when I get to that point, like, why? People have been saying this stuff for a long time. Why doesn't it change? And I know change is slow, but, like, what happens between now when we're all sitting here and we're like, oh, this is a great idea. Yeah, we should do this. We should have good culture, and we should talk about how we're going to structure our team, and we should do all that kind of stuff. Why does nobody ever do that? When they all sat here one day in one of these things and said, yeah, that was a good idea, nobody ever does it. So, I don't know. But it's probably going to happen to me too. I say that not because, I'm just saying because it happened to everybody else, and I don't think I'm special.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, like, how do I not do what everybody else has done?
This is really a question, and listen, that was great. I mean, I really appreciate that in terms of you're hearing it now, but you're in a role that maybe you don't see that you have a lot of power. And so my question is like, how do you, should we like do like some kind of psychological testing before like, something like not that we're like, okay, we're certified, but I mean like, okay, so that we know like what, our own like tendencies, whether to speak up or not, or, to whatever, before we get into this and then address the power, because I so see what you're talking about in terms of if I think somebody is smarter than I am, or they've been here longer, and they really are the ones who are supposed to tell us what to do, and so I think your point is, I don't mean to, you don't want to be touchy like that, but I think this point is we need to underscore that.
It's very well taken. I say that all the time. A lot of this has to come from top down. A lot of this has to be the leader modeling certain behaviors and encouraging certain behaviors, and creating an open and honest environment where people can speak up, or having an open door policy to where if I'm having some problems either with the supervisor or with my teammates, then I can go to my supervisor for some kind of resolution. So the leader of that organization, of that lab, has to set the culture. In the absence of that, then we still need to be empowered that when we're working on a horizontal level with our peers, that we can create our own culture. Also, the whole thing about the personality test, it is important. We did this a lot in corporate where we always took a Myers-Briggs or the DISC assessment, so that number one, you can understand your own tendencies, your own personality characteristics, as well as those of your teammates. And armed with that information, then maybe you can kind of minimize some of these conflicts that happen. The caveat that I would give to that, and what I've seen this in corporate, is that once I recognize that I'm a high extrovert, or on the DISC assessment I'm a high S, and everybody knows that, people tend to put you in a box. It's like, oh, well, that's Anthony. He's a high D. He's a dominant, characteristic. And it's like, I don't want to be typecast as that, because in truth, our personalities change depending on the context. Sometimes I'm a driver, at work, but sometimes I get home, I don't want to be a driver. And so my personality kind of shifts a little bit when I'm at home or when I'm in different environments. So we have to be careful about that.
I would add one more thing, and again, I appreciate everyone staying with us for a little past the half hour. To your point, and to bring it back to the beginning, there are so many different teams that you're on. So yes, if you're thinking, I am a med student, and I've got residents, and then I've got fellows, and then I've got faculty, blah, blah, blah. But within your med student years, you've got teams. So if you here heard this, and so if you can spread the word to your fellow med students, that's how the culture continues forward. In some ways, we have found in everything we do, it's very challenging to change full professors. They're set in their ways. So, we talk about with training, learning, and mentoring. Okay, well then we'll start with the assistant level professors, and as they go up, then they'll realize the value of it. And so, we may not be able to have impact on that, but the hope is if we keep doing this, and Anthony's given this talk how many times, and that's why we also stress, keep coming back to the same talk. Don't sit there and say, oh, I heard Dave Redden do stats 101. I don't need to hear it again. No, because you got different contexts as you go through your career. The other thing is, back to the charter, mentoring contracts, those types of things. What do you need to be successful? And if you're working with someone that doesn't value what you need to be successful, then find someone else. Easy for me to say. Sometimes you've got to make choices for your career advancement that you've got to work with someone that doesn't do that. But make sure you've got someone that values your opinion and values what you're saying, but also is willing to push back and say, well, here's what really needs to happen.
And the same kind of example I gave with Naveed, as far as modeling, you want to model the behavior that you want, to be modeled back to you. Even if you need to model that with your supervisor, your PI. Dr. Sutton says, I feel like we're having a disagreement right now. I see it as a relationship conflict or a process conflict or what have you. How do you see it? And so I think you model the behavior that you want to see. And so we can practice that in our training years with our teammates so that when we do become our own leaders, we start building out our own teams, then we are equipped with that. And like I said, we may need to revisit this information, multiple times before it actually starts becoming a behavior that just becomes part of the second nature of what we do. Yes, sir.
If you don't want me to ask it, so in academia, we kind of give it a little bit more freedom, and when we want to work on groups or grants, there's a little bit more of self-selection.
Sure.
And you said typically we want to work with people with who we are friendly with.
Yes.
What kind of, I think on what we saw in that last model with the different types of conflict, that might be a potential weakness going into the future. If we're only working with people who we are friends with, who we have similar viewpoints with, we're going to become even more siloed in our own viewpoint, even if it is interdisciplinary, which I think goes back to the T0 on your translational science. I think sometimes we need to force ourselves to work outside, even with individuals, even though it might be interdisciplinary, going out into the community, engaging with different stakeholders. So then that way, maybe it's a little bit more uncomfortable for us, but I think it will go and enrich our experience. So maybe AT&T was onto something.
And I think that just like you had the 3, that you can say we're 6 of us, and we'll say, okay, let's just take a minute and analyze, how we see the dynamics, and then we can compare and see how off we are. Are we seeing that? Oh, look, we're all more A, and maybe we had a couple of B's and C's, and using that sort of maybe reconcile if there are some conflicts that that I didn't. Oh, you saw that? Or wow, I must have been asleep at the wheel. So talk about that.
Yeah. So we may need to just take some temperature checks, across the project. Be like, okay, so let's kind of just talk about it, just kind of get it out in the open. And to your point, my career has been enriched so much by me getting outside the business school and engaging with people all over campus. I've grown so much. Apurva is one of my new students. We just started working with each other, and we were just talking in the break, and she was like, man, this is a lot to learn. And I know how you feel because it's been about 2.5 years since I've been working kind of on this side of campus. And I remember when I first came over here, started hearing about PIs and efforts and all these acronyms. It felt very overwhelming, but it's taken time. And so now I'm like, I get it. And so now you and I have started talking about working on some grant projects together. And so it's really, really enriched my career. So I would encourage you, as you're going through your medical training, get outside of your silos, get outside of your discipline, and start engaging with other people. It's going to pay dividends because this is a long career. You guys are going to be doing this for the next 30 or 40 years. Interdisciplinary science is here to stay. You might as well go ahead and start practicing that right now. So I thank you for your engagement. I'll stick around if you want to kind of talk one-on-one. Tulane, do you have anything that you want to add before?
They had to run to another meeting.
Okay, cool.
Great work.
Yes, but I just, Zendaya, Sam, Audrey, Anthony, and Kaylee, if I could see you guys before. Thanks, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Nice to meet you, man. Good luck with yours. Your work. Hope to see you on Friday.
Good luck.
I have a comment, but I would just on okay. I went to school at Auburn, and
I was thinking that. Sorry. So I just want to step up.
Do we need to move out, Brian?
No, you're fine. Okay. Come on.
But
You're fine. I was like,
Okay, I was looking for Renee, I think she did this.
Huh?
I was looking for Dr. Renee, I think
She has to step out, I think.
Oh, there's. She left like kind of big and it's cool. Okay. Shoot.
All right, I just wanted to. I just wanted to introduce all of you. So Sam Baker's the new VA Quality Scholar, surgical fellow. Elise, who's talking about Anthony is going into her second year of VA Quality Pharmacist from Kaylee is going to be pre-instructs on the T32, but no matter what, will be with us from Utah. Recently, I got clinical psychologist. It's going to be working with Dr. Tron, both of them. Working with Dr. Morris and Dr. Tron. Sandhya. Sandhya. All right. Thank you. Sandhya. Gerontology fellow, correct? Kelly. I just wanted and Ketis. So T32. Anthony Campbell's going into his second year on the T32, then social background, working with Julie Locker, and still working through it. But, and then Audrey Wallace, radiation oncology with Okay. So, Elise, I was just introducing folks, and you're talking to Anthony.
I really loved it.
So, real quick, you know Sam, Haley,
Yes, do it.
Sonia, Anthony, who you know from last year, and then Audrey. So, I just want to say things. I don't want to take up too much more time. I know it's later. August 25th, keep coming each week. We'll still be doing the following week. August 25th is when we'll do the official orientation for the new year. Okay? Any quick questions I can answer?
Some mandatory.
Cool.
Will that be here and some?
Everything will be here.
There's some
Keep going through
mandatory classes where everyone.
And still working through the FOT space
Echoed,
as well.
which means like they're recorded, so you can listen.
I copied you on the email about letters. I think everything's going well. Lisa about today. Paul with Derek. Well, I've got the T32 course. So it's been interesting. I was talking to a program about this week before. AHRQ finally got their allotment of funds. So the way the NERSA funds work is NIH gets theirs, and then ARC gets a percentage of that. Thank you. And so AHRQ just got it after actually the official start date of this current year. So they're working through the process. It doesn't impact anything. I mean, you're still gonna have the funding. We don't have the official MGA, which means we're in an at-risk account, which is normal for grants. But once we get that, I'll get it to you. The necessary folks say, hey, here's the actual account number to do, and tuition and all that stuff, and fingers crossed, we'll have the official, but again, no matter what, we'll get our problem. And so that's why, again, what we'll do for you is July, no matter what, we'll have you stay. Okay?
Can I get your email?
Thanks, everybody.
Go ahead and send you.
I need to do anything.
I don't think so. If the T32 comes through, then we'll have to get you set up, get some PRA comments, unless you already have one to do all that kind of stuff. Otherwise, I think we're good. I mean, eventually, once you do the orientation, you'll have to do set up the direct deposit, all those kinds of stuff. But Lisa is there, should be.
No, that's perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't technically start school back until August. So September we mail them.
September would be probably good.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, good. Good, good. All right, and keep us, stay on me. I mean, it's on the top of my radar, but don't hesitate to
So it's kind of like.
ask for updates if I can give you one.
Okay. Your patients together,
Good.
restricted right now, what do you do?
Yeah, yes, and so, and it's stuff we should have, but we'll get it.
It's fine.
All right.
Everything.
Do you have a good OIPS for